I walked into the shelter looking for a puppy to grow old with. Instead, I chose the one with only months left. I had a 15-year plan. I know that sounds ridiculous for a 24-year-old, but I'd mapped it all out with the kind of detail that would make a wedding planner weep with joy. Get the puppy at 24, train him through my late 20s. He'd be the ring bearer at my wedding, probably around 30 if I was lucky. He'd be there when I bought my first house, would nap in the nursery while I rocked my future children to sleep, would gray alongside me as I figured out this whole adult thing. 15 years. A nice, neat package of unconditional love with a beginning, middle, and end I could prepare for. The shelter smelled antiseptic and desperation, with an underlying note of wet dog that no amount of bleach could quite mask. I'd done my research, of course. I knew what breed I wanted, what age range, what energy level would match my lifestyle. I was ready for the chaos, the chewed shoes, the puddles on the kitchen floor, the 3 a.m. whining. I was ready to invest in a future. The first 3 rows were exactly what I expected. Puppies. Dozens of them. Jumping, yapping, pressing their wet noses against the chain link, tails whipping so hard their entire back ends wagged. A chocolate lab mix doing backflips, a German shepherd puppy howling like he was auditioning for a wolf documentary, a golden retriever tumbling over his own 2 big paws. Everyone wants a puppy, including me. I walked past them slowly, clipboard in hand, mentally checking boxes. Too energetic, too big, too small, wrong coloring for my aesthetic. God, that sounds shallow now, but I was treating this like I was shopping for a couch that had to match my throw pillows. Then I reached the final row, the quiet corner, the place they don't put on the website, the place where hope goes to wait. That's where I saw him. Rocky. The name was on a small weathered tag zip-tied to his kennel, written in handwriting that had seen better days. He was a golden retriever, or at least he used to be golden. Now he was white. Snow white. The kind of white that speaks of years, not genetics. His face looked like someone had dusted it with powdered sugar, concentrated around his muzzle and eyes. He was curled in the corner of his kennel on a thin blanket, sleeping so deeply that I actually stopped breathing for a second to see if his chest was still moving. It was, barely, just these shallow, rhythmic rises and falls. I don't know what made me kneel down. Maybe it was the silence. In a room full of desperate barking, his quiet felt like a black hole pulling me in. I pressed my fingers against the chain link. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. Nothing. He didn't even twitch. A woman appeared beside me, late 30s, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes that had seen too many goodbyes. Her name tag read, Maria, Senior Adoption Counselor. Of course they had a specific counselor for this section. "That's Rocky," she said softly, like she was introducing me to sleeping royalty. "He's 14. 14. My 15-year plan died a quiet death in my chest. 14? I repeated. The number felt heavy in my mouth. Maria unlocked the kennel with a practiced key jangle that should have woken him but didn't. She had to actually reach in and gently touch his shoulder. He startled awake, not with a puppy's instant energy, but with the slow, confused blink of someone who'd forgotten where they were. His eyes were cloudy, filmed over with the blue-white haze of age. He looked at Maria, then at me, then seemed to decide neither of us was worth the effort of standing for. "What's his story?" I asked, even though I was already mentally backing away. This wasn't the plan. This was the opposite of the plan. Maria sat down on the concrete floor like she had all the time in the world. I found myself sitting too. "His owner passed away. Gentleman named Richard, 87 years old, had a heart attack in his living room. Rocky was with him, stayed with him, actually, for 3 days before a neighbor noticed the newspapers piling up. My throat went tight. 3 days? 3 days. Didn't leave Richard's side, didn't eat, didn't drink. When animal control finally got there, Rocky was lying right next to him, head on Richard's chest. Maria reached in and stroked Rocky's head with a tenderness that made my eyes burn. They tried to find a family to take him, but Richard's kids live overseas. They didn't want him, said it would be too expensive to ship a dog, especially one this old. I watched Rocky's cloudy eyes trek a dust mote in the air with vague interest. Is he sick? I mean, beyond just being old. No. Well, yes and no. Maria pulled out a folder, his medical records, I realized. He's got arthritis in his hips and front right leg. His eyes have pretty advanced cataracts. The vet says his heart has a murmur. Nothing critical, just tired. He's on pain medication for arthritis and joint supplements. But he's not dying, if that's what you're asking. He's just old. Just old. Like that was simple. Like that didn't mean anything. How long does he have? Maria looked at me with those two knowing eyes. Could be a year, could be 3 years if we're lucky, could be 3 months. He's 14, honey. Every day is borrowed time. I should have stood up then, should have thanked her politely and gone back to the puppy rows where my 15-year plan was waiting. But I made the mistake of looking back at Rocky. Really looking. He was watching me now with those filmed eyes, and even through the haze, I could see something. Not hope, exactly. More like quiet acceptance. Like he'd been passed over so many times he didn't even bother hoping anymore. Can you tell me about the senior stigma? I asked, surprising myself. Maria's eyebrows rose. You've done research. I'm a planner. She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Senior dogs are the most loyal animals you'll ever meet. They're already trained, already past the destructive phase, already know who they are. They just want a comfortable place to sleep and someone to love. But people don't want them. Our adoption rate for puppies is about 90% within the first month. For seniors? She gestured around the quiet row. Less than 10%. Most of them die here. People are afraid of getting attached to something they know they'll lose soon. But you lose everything eventually, I said quietly. Exactly, Maria stood up, brushing off her jeans. But most people aren't ready to face that truth when they're looking at puppies doing backflips. I looked back at the puppy section where a young couple was laughing as a beagle mix licked their faces through the fence. Everyone wanted them. Of course they did. They were the future, full of promise and years and memories yet to be made. I looked at Rocky. Nobody wanted him. And I realized something that shattered my 15-year plan into a million pieces. I didn't want to grow old with a dog. I wanted to make sure this dog didn't die alone in a concrete kennel, wondering why the person he'd loved most in the world never came back. I'll take him, I heard myself say. Maria's face did something complicated. Joy and sadness mixed together. Karen, I need you to really think about this. You're young. You came here for a puppy. This isn't what you planned for. I know. He's going to break your heart. Maybe in 3 months, maybe in a year, but it's coming. I know. And you're sure? I reached into the kennel. Rocky sniffed my hand with a wet nose, then, slowly, like it took great effort, he lifted his head and rested his chin on my palm. The weight of it, the trust in that simple gesture, nearly undid me. I'm sure. The walk to my car was nothing like I'd imagined. No excited puppy pulling on the leash, no jumping, no manic energy. Just the slow, dignified click-clack of Rocky's nails on the pavement. He walked like royalty, like he'd done this 1,000 times before and knew exactly how it went. Maria had given me a folder of paperwork, medication instructions, and a bag of the senior dog food he was used to. Take it slow with him, she'd said at the door. He's been through a lot. Just let him adjust. I opened the passenger door and spread a blanket on the seat. I'd brought it for a puppy, something to protect my upholstery from accidents. Rocky looked at the car, then at me, then at the car again, like he was calculating if his old bones could make the jump. I ended up lifting him, surprised by how light he was under all that fur. He must have lost weight after Richard died. He didn't stick his head out the window as I drove, didn't pant with excitement or try to climb into my lap. He just rested his chin on my arm where it lay on the center console and let out this long, shuddering sigh. It was a sound of pure relief, exhausted, overwhelming relief. I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see through my tears. When we got to my apartment, I realized how utterly unprepared I was for a senior dog. I'd bought a crate, useless. I'd bought puppy pads, insulting, probably. I'd bought a bag of tennis balls and a rope toy. Rocky sniffed them once and walked away. What he did love was the couch. The moment I sat down, he stood in front of me, looking up with those cloudy eyes, and I understood. I patted the cushion next to me, and he climbed up with a grunt of effort, circled 3 times, a ritual, a memory of instinct, and collapsed against my side with another one of those soul-deep sighs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed watching YouTube videos on my phone about senior dog care, while Rocky snored on the orthopedic bed I'd emergency ordered for express delivery. I learned about joint supplements and massage techniques and the importance of routine for elderly animals. I learned that older dogs often suffer from anxiety and confusion, especially if they've lost their person. I learned that love, at the end of a life, is just as important as love at the beginning. Around 3 a.m., I heard him whimpering. Not loud, just these small, heartbroken sounds. I found him standing in the middle of the living room, looking confused and scared, like he'd forgotten where he was, like he was looking for someone who would never come. "Hey, Rocky," I whispered, kneeling down. "It's okay. You're home." He looked at me with those milky eyes, and I saw the confusion clear just a little. I led him back to his bed, but when I tried to return to my room, he whimpered again. So I grabbed my pillow and blanket and made a nest on the floor next to him. He stopped whimpering immediately. I woke up the next morning with his head on my stomach and a plan forming in my mind. If Rocky didn't have years, then I'd make damn sure the time he had was filled with everything he'd missed, everything he deserved, everything that would make these final chapters Rocky-tiful. I called it the bucket list. I started small. The pet store had an entire section for senior dogs I'd never even noticed. Softer foods, gentler treats, supplements for joints and cognition. I bought him 3 new beds, each one in a different room, so he'd always have somewhere comfortable to rest. I bought soft, plush blankets that held warmth. I didn't buy toys. I bought comfort. But comfort wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel alive again. The first real item on the bucket list was simple, a gourmet meal. I'd read that as dogs age, their sense of smell and taste fades, making food less interesting. But strong scents and tender textures could bring back some of that joy. So I went to the butcher and bought the most expensive cut of steak they had. I cooked it that evening, searing it in butter and rosemary, cutting it into perfect, tender cubes. The smell filled my tiny apartment, and for the first time since I'd brought him home, Rocky stood up on his own and wandered into the kitchen with something like interest. I put the bowl down. He sniffed it, looked at me, looked back at the bowl like he wasn't sure if this was allowed, if this was real. "Go ahead, buddy," I whispered. "It's yours." The first bite was cautious. The second was less so. By the third, his tail was wagging, this slow, creaky metronome that might have been rusty from disuse, but was working again. I watched the light come back into those cloudy eyes, watched him remember what it felt like to be spoiled, to be special, to be loved. I cried into my own takeout while he finished every last piece. The days that followed developed a rhythm. We didn't go on long walks. Rocky couldn't handle more than a block or 2 before his hips started giving him trouble. But we sat. God, we sat. In the park, where he could watch children play and dogs run and the world move around him without requiring him to keep up. On my tiny balcony, where the afternoon sun made a perfect warm square on the concrete and he could bask like an old king on his throne. On the couch, where I'd read aloud to him, books, articles, whatever, just so he could hear a voice that wasn't the silence of an empty house. I learned that doing nothing with Rocky was more fulfilling than any 5K run I'd ever planned with my imaginary puppy. There was something profound in the stillness, in the way he'd rest his head on my knee and just breathe, in sync, together, present. I started thinking about time differently. I was 24 and already worried about the future: career, relationships, money, success. Rocky was 14 and had lived through more than I could imagine. Different families, maybe, different homes. 14 years of love and loss and everything in between, all culminating in 3 days alone with his best friend's body and then a concrete kennel. My problems felt very small next to that. 6 weeks in, I had a bad day at work, the kind where everything goes wrong and you want to scream into the void. I came home ready to collapse, ready to wallow, ready for the universe to give me a break. Rocky was waiting by the door, like always, tail doing its slow metronomal ag. He followed me to the couch, and when I sat down in my haze of self-pity, he did something he'd never done before. He climbed onto my lap. All 65 pounds of arthritic golden retriever carefully, painfully arranged himself across my legs, his head on my chest, right over my heart, and he sighed. It was the same sigh from the car ride home, pure relief. But this time, I realized, it wasn't just his relief, it was mine, too. "Thank you," I whispered into his white fur. "Thank you for being here." His tail thumped once against the couch cushion. We added it to the bucket list. A puppuccino from Starbucks, which he wore more than he drank, but seemed to enjoy anyway. A day at a dog-friendly beach where he could dig his paws into the sand and smell the ocean. A professional photo shoot because I realized I didn't have any pictures of him, and that felt like a crime. A visit to a nursing home where the residents cooed over him, and he soaked up their gentle attention like he'd been starved for it. Each experience was slow, careful, measured to his abilities, but each one brought that light back to his eyes a little more. Then came the bad day. I woke up at 6 a.m. to use the bathroom and noticed Rocky wasn't in his usual spot by my bed. I found him in the living room, lying on his side, whimpering. When I called his name, he tried to get up and couldn't. His back legs just wouldn't work, scrambling uselessly on the hardwood floor. Terror hit me like ice water. This was it. This was the thing Maria warned me about. 3 months had felt like a blessing, and now it was up, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. I would never be ready. I called the emergency vet with shaking hands, threw on clothes, and tried to figure out how to move him without hurting him. He was looking at me with those cloudy eyes, and I could see confusion there, pain, maybe an apology. "No," I said firmly, kneeling next to him. "Don't you dare apologize. This isn't your fault." The vet was a 20-minute drive. I couldn't lift him to the car by myself. I grabbed a beach towel from the closet, worked it under his hindquarters, and used it as a sling to help him stand. His front legs held, his back legs dangled, but with the towel supporting his weight, he could move. We made it to the car, we made it to the vet, and in the harsh fluorescent lights of the examination room, with Rocky on the cold metal table and my heart in my throat, the vet did x-rays and blood work and a dozen other tests while I held my breath and prayed to gods I wasn't sure I believed in. "It's not a stroke," the vet finally said. "His hip dysplasia has worsened. The pain medication isn't cutting it anymore. We can try a stronger dose, add some muscle relaxers." But Karen, she looked at me with the same expression Maria had worn at the shelter, kindness mixed with knowing. "You need to start thinking about quality of life." Quality of life, the polite way of saying, "When will you let him go?" "How long?" My voice cracked. "Could be weeks, could be days. When he can't stand anymore, when he stops eating, When you see more pain than peace, that's when you'll know. I drove home with Rocky arranged carefully in the back seat, my mind spiraling through every horrible possibility. The apartment felt like a tomb when we got there. I helped him inside with the towel sling, and he stood in the middle of the living room, swaying slightly, looking lost. I didn't know what to do. Everything felt wrong. Everything felt like it was ending. Then Rocky sniffed the air, turned his head toward the balcony door. The afternoon sun was starting to make its usual warm square on the concrete. He pulled forward, not with strength, but with determination. I slid open the door and he walked, slowly, shakily, but on his own, to that patch of sunlight. He sniffed the air, breathing in the city smells and the breeze and everything that meant alive, alive, still alive. Then he lowered himself down onto the warm concrete, found a comfortable position, and his tail wagged. Just a few thumps, but they were there. He looked back at me, and I swear to God, even through the cloudy cataracts, I could read his expression. Not today. I'm not done loving you yet. I sat down next to him and cried. Big, ugly, grateful sobs. Because he was still here. Because he was still fighting. Because even at 14 years old, with hips that barely worked and eyes that barely saw, he was telling me the same thing I'd told him that first night. You're home. It's okay. We're together. The stronger medication helped. Not a cure, but a reprieve. Rocky still had bad days where the towel sling was necessary, but he also had good days where he could make it outside on his own, where his tail wagged at the smell of steak, where he climbed onto the couch to nap in his favorite spot. I learned to read his signals, to know when he needed help and when he needed to prove he could do it himself. I learned that dignity matters, even at the end, especially at the end. People started noticing the change in me. My best friend commented that I seemed calmer, more present. My mom said I looked happier during our video calls. My boss mentioned that I'd stopped checking my phone obsessively during meetings. I didn't tell them it was because of Rocky, because of the way he taught me that right now is the only moment that matters. Because planning 15 years ahead means missing the perfect warmth of the sun on this particular afternoon. Because love doesn't need time to be meaningful, it just needs to be true. His coat started looking better, softer, shinier, less matted. I'd started brushing him every evening, a ritual we both loved. His eyes were still cloudy, his hips still hurt, but there was a brightness to him that hadn't been there in the shelter. A lightness. 5 months after I brought him home, I was working at my desk when Rocky struggled to his feet and walked over to me. He put his head in my lap, tail wagging in that slow, creaky way. I stroked his white muzzle, and he sighed. Content, peaceful, home. I love you too, buddy, I whispered. I'd come to the shelter looking for a puppy to build a future with. Instead, I'd found an old dog who taught me how to live in the present. I thought I was saving him, giving him a soft place to land at the end of his life, but the truth was more complicated than that. He saved me. He taught me that a short time with a great soul is infinitely better than a lifetime with a shallow one. He taught me that every moment is borrowed, whether you have 15 years or 15 months. He taught me that love isn't measured in time. It's measured in depth, in presence, in the way you show up for someone even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I know the goodbye is coming. Maybe tomorrow, maybe 6 months from now. The vet reminds me gently at each checkup to watch for the signs, to be ready. But I'm not afraid anymore, because when that day comes, Rocky won't die wondering why his person never came back. He won't die alone in a concrete kennel, passed over and forgotten. He'll die knowing he was loved, completely, fiercely, presently loved. And isn't that all any of us really want? To matter to someone, to be chosen, to be worth the heartbreak. As I write this, Rocky is sleeping at my feet, his white muzzle resting on my shoe, his breath coming in those familiar, shallow rises and falls. The apartment is quiet, except for the click of my keyboard and his soft snores. Outside, the afternoon sun is starting to make its slow journey toward the horizon, and in an hour or so, I'll help him out to the balcony for his favorite time of day. We'll sit together in the warmth and watch the world go by, and I'll tell him what I tell him every day. Thank you for choosing me back. Because that's what happened, really. I didn't just choose him. He chose to trust again, to love again, to believe that this strange young woman with her bucket lists and her tears and her ridiculous optimism might actually mean it, which he promised, "You're home now." The oldest hearts often have the most love left to give. You just have to be brave enough to accept it, knowing that accepting it means accepting the grief that comes with it. But I'm learning that grief is just love with no place to go. And I'd rather have that love now, in this moment, than spend my life wondering what I missed by playing it safe. So here's what I want you to know. If you're watching this and thinking about getting a dog, please, please consider the seniors, the ones in the quiet corner, the ones with white muzzles and cloudy eyes, and hearts that have already been broken, but are somehow still capable of infinite love. They won't be at your wedding. They might not make it to your first house. They won't grow up with your children. But they'll teach you how to be present. They'll show you what unconditional love really looks like. They'll remind you that every single day is a gift, not a guarantee. And when the goodbye comes, because it will come, you'll carry them with you in ways a 15-year plan could never account for. In the way you stop to feel the sun on your face, in the way you notice the quiet moments, in the way you love deeply instead of safely. Rocky just opened one cloudy eye and looked at me. His tail thumped twice. Time for our balcony ritual. This story isn't over yet, but when it is, I'll know I did right by him. And maybe, in some small way, the world will know that senior dogs deserve to be chosen too. Because the oldest hearts often have the most love left to give. You just have to be brave enough to receive it. Subscribe to Heartbound Canine Tales to honor more senior dogs whose greatest act of love is teaching us that every moment matters, especially the ones we didn't plan for.